On today's Locked On Thunder podcast, the Oklahoma City Thunder have a unique schedule situation with just 3 games in 10 days. We're going to break that down, recap the week that was, but also get into the MVP conversation with SGA. Should he win the MVP, and would this change the trajectory of the league if he doesn't?
You are Locked On Thunder, your daily Oklahoma City Thunder podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's get it going on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, media member, and beat writer for Thunder on SI, Rylan Stiles. Follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. Follow the show on Twitter at LOThunderPod. Email the show, LOThunderPod@gmail.com. On today's show, brought to you by FanDuel, which now is the perfect time to join. Go download the Game Time, the FanDuel app, and use code LOCKEDONNBA if you want to at FanDuel, because with the Super Bowl here, there's no better time to make exciting bets. And when you do, and you're a new customer, you place that $5 bet, and you'll win $200 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. We'll have more on that coming up. We're going to talk about the week that was for the Thunder, which included another loss to the Dallas Mavericks, the week ahead for the Thunder, and the MVP talk with Michael Martin at Michael on Sports on Twitter, and Let's Talk Thunder on YouTube. Michael, how you feeling today? Kind of an ability to catch your breath a little bit after a jam-packed Thunder schedule.
Feeling good. Like you mentioned, it feels like one of those things where you're like in school and you're like, it's a little bit too quiet. I feel like something's due that I'm not aware of, but I'm enjoying the little space we have right now.
Yeah, no homework due. I mean, there's 3 games in 10 days. Is a strange anomaly, but we all know how the schedule goes by now, especially with the new in-season tournament, the NBA Cup. You have to have a jam-packed January. They've survived their jam-packed January. Now they get this mini break with the 2 days before Portland, 2 days before Golden State, 2 days before Sacramento, and then they'll go through another little gauntlet stretch in the start of February to get games in before the All-Star break, and then enjoy the All-Star break where they can really, really recharge. But let's start, as we always do, Michael, going backward in time with the week that was. And it started out with the bang, the Utah Jazz game. It was a 123-114 win, and the big exclamation point of this game was SGA's first ever 50-point game. Obviously, the nitty-gritty of that game doesn't truly matter other than SGA. So what do you think of SGA's scoring performance?
Incredible game, incredible performance by him. My main takeaway was I wasn't at that game, and that is now I've missed 3 games since I've been credentialed, and 2 out of the 3 games Shai has gotten a new career high. So if anyone would like to start a GoFundMe to pay me not to go to these games, we can negotiate. But he was awesome, and those are, it's one of those things where it's like it's the Jazz, and it's one of those games where you'd probably want his 50-point game to come against like a better team, but the reality of the situation is we can't control that, and it was a game where the Thunder needed it for them to pull it out.
Yeah, they needed that. And then, the scoring stuff on the Jazz, yes, the Jazz aren't good. They don't even pretend to be good, but they did play all of their guys in that game that were healthy. They weren't like tanking that game away, and their guys are all these super long. They put Lauri Markkanen on him. They had rim protection behind him, and he still just went to work. And he was able to shoulder bump Walker Kessler 5 feet backward and get to his spots and hit mid-range jumpers. And he did it really without the 3. He hit 3 threes to score 54 points. He was, in my opinion, snubbed for Player of the Week by Jaren Jackson Jr. I think that part of that, though, was Jaren Jackson's team obviously went 4-0, and Shai's team went 2-1. And it's a league award, which is voted on from people within the league, to where he's already won 2 Player of the Months. I think he's trending toward a 3rd straight Player of the Month award this month. You do want to spread the wealth a little bit and highlight some other guys if you're in the NBA's perspective, and that could be why he didn't win Player of the Week this week, but he certainly deserved it individually. And the Jazz game was just a great game for him personally, because we look at these scores, and the thing that has almost turned into a negative from Shai is that he always shows up and drops 30 points, but he never has these brilliant scoring games. And he was able to do that because he was forced to play in the fourth quarter. He's already sat out of 10 fourth quarters this season, which is a quarter of their games. And I think that gets lost whenever people talk about his lack of high-scoring games. How many of these fourth quarters does he enter with 40 points and doesn't play. Therefore, he would have gotten to that threshold in all likelihood had he had to play them. He had to play them against the Jazz, and he got the job done in terms of the big scoring night, which can be another feather in his cap toward the MVP conversation, which we're going to talk about coming up. But they did fall to the Mavericks. And Michael, this is a game where there's almost two schools of thought. You can like overreact and say the Thunder can't beat Dallas. You can underreact and say none of it matters. It's like the game never even got played because it was such a unique set of circumstances for both teams. Neither team was healthy. Neither team was even a fraction of healthy. And the truth's most of the time in the middle. So what was your initial reaction to how that Dallas game unfolded?
By the end of it, I wasn't so much caught up in a win or a loss as much as it just felt like for a lot of the game, the Mavericks were just sort of bullying the Thunder in a lot of ways. Like that one video of Gafford sort of just juggling the ball in front of Shai where he's not letting him get it to inbound the ball, I think sort of just encapsulates a lot of the Thunder's fans' feelings about it, of just sort of, I want to say getting punked, but there are ways where the Mavericks are just sort of big brothering them. So that's one of those points where you can take that as a grain of salt or look at it as a big thing, because I feel like Chet and Hartenstein are going to be guys who definitely impact that, of not letting that happen. Hartenstein in particular brings a lot of physicality, and that's a big part of it. But it's disappointing, and just like I've mentioned this year with the other loss to the Mavs, is just it's because it's against this team. If it was a loss to anybody else, sure, it'd be disappointing because Thunder fans don't like to lose, especially with how well they've been playing this season. But overall, just frustrating loss, but I don't think it's something to write home about in terms of like the impact it's going to have on the grand scheme of the season. But the vibes and sort of just how the Mavs is sort of controlled when these two teams match up, I would be slightly concerned with.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those situations where the Thunder and Mavericks have played one game in which Luka played and Hartenstein played and the Thunder won. I don't think that you can outright dismiss the Dallas Mavericks, though. I also don't think that the Dallas Mavericks can act as though they just waltz into a playoff series and come away with a playoff series win over the Thunder. I think that we just don't know yet how a series would play out whenever you have rim protection, and not only that, have rim protection for 48 minutes, which you've never had against Dallas. In any of these games, dating back to last year, you've never had rim protection constantly on the floor. That will change the dynamic by itself. You also have better spacing than you had a year ago. So even last year's playoff series, while there's some same characters from it remaining, it is a brand new dynamic. What I think does deserve some reaction, and why I don't think you can dismiss it entirely, is the confidence. And we talk about how role players play better at home. They also play better whenever they're comfortable. Those Mavericks role players are clearly comfortable against Dallas, against Oklahoma City. And the Thunder role players, not so much against Dallas. And that can have a huge effect on how a series goes and how a series trends. I would still personally pick the Thunder to win. I think that they would win the series over Dallas as long as both teams can get there healthy and both teams can play each other with their actual rosters. I think the Thunder would win. But I also think that Dallas has the best case, one of the better cases, to push the Thunder to a 6-7 game series. And once you get a series to that point, it can really go either way. I just would lean Oklahoma City based on what we've seen this year and what we also haven't seen. We still have this mystery box of like, what does Chet and Hartenstein look like together that we haven't gotten to unpack yet in Oklahoma City. And for Dallas, they have two of the best all-time greats, like in Kyrie and Luka, who will keep you in a series. So I don't think that it's disrespectful to either side to say this will be a long series. I just tip the scales toward Oklahoma City for right now, even with the 3-1 record that Dallas boasts over OKC this year.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, we saw how close this series was last year, and I feel like the Thunder are the team that got better just in terms of assets, player acquisition, things like that. The Mavs are a little bit different, but I don't think that they improved as much as the Thunder just in terms of talent. Jason Kidd, I think, is something that was sort of skipped over. I think that he's a controversial coach in terms of, like, he's very polarizing, but in the playoffs, like Draymond said, there's 82 game players, there's 16 game players. I think Jason Kidd is a 16 game coach in terms of being able to really, really lock into these matchups. But I'm right there with you. I don't think that these last few games are ultimately going to change a ton of things. But this series, if these two teams match up at the playoffs, potentially is going to go 6 or 7 games for sure.
Yeah, Jason Kidd deserves a ton of credit. I know he's much aligned, even within Mavericks fans. And I just find that head scratching. I think Jason Kidd is one of the best coaches in this league, no matter the setting, but especially in the playoffs. His resume speaks for itself. That's 2 trips to the Western Conference Finals, with one winning the Western Conference Finals, going to the NBA Finals last year. So I can't see how you can knock Jason Kidd. By the flip side of that coin, Mark's only gotten 1 chance in the playoffs. Just like players have to learn from postseason experience, so do coaches. And so we'll see what his next move will be in a series like this one. I just think that the NBA should be hoping that we get this in a 1-8 matchup, and Dallas can hold up their end of the bargain, or just outright get to the playoffs, because Luka's going to come back soon, and we know that will rise them up the standings some. No matter what, I think Dallas will make the playoffs. They'll be one of the top 8 teams when the play-in's over and whenever the dust settles. And if it's a 1-8 matchup, that's the best 1-8 matchup ever in NBA history. And then you have a situation where each matchup in the first round of the Western Conference playoffs will be must-see TV. I don't know that any of them will get the boot to NBA TV status. It could just be solely Eastern Conference channel there once the playoffs begin. But we'll see how it all unfolds. And we went through the matchups last week of who's toughest, who's easiest for Oklahoma City matchup-wise. And Stiles makes fights, and this is a bad matchup for the Thunder, but that does not mean the Thunder can't win that matchup. Again, I think we both picked the Thunder to win that matchup, despite how you may feel after the regular season series all comes to a close. Coming up, let's talk MVP. It's the midway point of the season. It's time to debate awards, and the chief among them is the MVP award. But first, I want to say right now, our good friends over at FanDuel, go check out FanDuel today, because Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities. There's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether you're predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action with live betting all game long. You can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what's happening on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's icing on the cake. Go download the FanDuel app or go to FanDuel.com to get started. Just place your first $5 bet. If you win, boom, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, the official partner of Super Bowl 59. Patrick Mahomes, the favorite to win the Super Bowl MVP award right now. And if you're only into the NBA, there's no problem with that, because we still have odds on the NBA, including the Lakers in Philadelphia. You can bet on the Lakers, who are 4-point favorites on the road tonight against the 76ers at FanDuel.com. We're back on the Lockdown Thunder podcast, on the Lockdown Podcast Network, your teams every day. Thank you so much for making us your first listen every single morning, every single day. We're here for you, talking Thunder basketball, here with Michael Martin at Michael on Sports on Twitter. Let's Talk Thunder on YouTube. Michael, when you look at the MVP conversation, it feels like it's a 2-player race, and that's how the odds from our good friends at FanDuel suggest as well, with the Shai and Jokic odds. Whenever you look at the MVP conversation right now, SGA is the favorite at -350, but Jokic is right there at +230. Then it drops all the way down to +1200 with Giannis. So he's kind of been eliminated in terms of the Vegas odds from this talk. If you had to vote for the MVP, who would you vote for if the season ended today?
God, that's so tough. I'm in between both those guys, obviously. I mean, those are only 2 choices. So, but I'll say Jokic, just because I think that there's a historical precedent for what he's doing. If he gets in the top 3 seed, it's just going to be somewhat undeniable. And I know that they've sort of set this situation, a precedent of like him winning multiple MVPs and whatnot, but he's going to be the first guy since Russ to average like 29, 10, and 10, a 30-point, almost triple-double, which he could get to, and he's going to be doing on a team that's probably a top 3 to 4 seed. I'm not typically somebody who enjoys back-to-back MVPs or the guy who wins 3 straight or whatever, but Jokic in particular, I think what's most impressive is just that he's top 5 in the 3 major statistical categories. The team is winning, And I think it really comes down to the fact of like the MVP criteria, quote unquote, is really changing for a lot of people. Because if you just look of what it used to be, which was best player, best team, that's Shai. But then you get into the most valuable sort of word and phrasing, I think that's where people can bend it a little bit towards Jokic. But either way, no matter who wins it, is going to be ultra deserving.
Yeah, both players are extremely deserving of this honor. And when you look at Jokic, like he's 2 points, rebounds, assists, like all those things. He's 2 away from leading in every category statistically in the NBA. That's insane how good Jokic is. I would vote for Shai because of what we look at with what's happened before, where if Jokic wins this award, he's got the same amount of MVPs as LeBron James. He would only have a couple less than Michael Jordan. And we've just never done this. We've never given the MVP award to the best player in the sport over and over and over again, regardless of circumstances. And perhaps that was always silly. Perhaps that should change. And I think if you give it to Jokic again, you're forced to change that mindset. You're forced to just always have Jokic as your MVP because he's always going to put up these numbers. He's always going to do something we've never seen before. That's how good he is. That's how good LeBron was. That's how good Michael Jordan was. That's how good all the all-time greats were. So if not now, whenever he's far and away not even in contention for the 1 seed, he's 9 games back of the 1 seed, and he can get to a top 3 seed. I think that he probably will get to a top 3 seed, but he is technically, as we talk right now, 3.5 games back of that marker. This is going to be the worst a Jokic-led team is like for his whole prime career, and perhaps statistically the best he's ever been. And he's already bagged all these 3 MVPs, and this will be his 4th. But again, we've just never done it that way. We've never voted the best player in the sport the MVP constantly. And if these last 2 years from Shai can't, quote unquote, steal an MVP, because again, I don't want to call it stealing because Shai's deserving, but you get it. He's not the best player in the world, but he's the best player of this season. If that's not good enough for an MVP this year, then we should just never not give it to Jokic. He's always going to do this. He's always going to be incredible if you can't get him right now. Because after this season, where he was not even in contention for the 1 seed, and you've went wire to wire, waltzing your way to the 1 seed with the statistics to back it up for Shai, what's the argument then to ever dethrone Jokic?
I would say that there's no guarantee that we ever see him put up numbers like this again. And part of the argument for Jokic is that his numbers continue to just escalate and get better. And one of the things that, while you were talking, reminded me of was when LeBron had his run of dominance where he was winning MVP after MVP, and who came in second was Kevin Durant. And a lot of weird things happened, and just some external circumstances happened where Kevin Durant gets the MVP off some of what Russell Westbrook being injured. But part of it, I think, is Jokic, at some point, there's going to be some sort of health thing or something where he sort of just is on cruise control during the regular season. Right now, he can't do that because the rest of the team around him is not that talented. But I think that could change in the next few years.
Yeah, that could be a factor that changes. I just think that Jokic is such a brand of player that since he does all these things, and that the CBA is the way the CBA is, and the Nuggets roster is the way that it is, I'm not sure when he'll ever get to just put it on cruise control and not put up these gaudy stats to not deserve the MVP award. So it's an interesting dilemma, because if you're a voter, I can't blame you for voting for Jokic. I think that that's an incredible vote. I think that this is probably one of his most impressive seasons, which is saying a lot because he's already an all-time great. He's already one of the best players we've ever seen. It's just the bind you've been put in by the past and going and getting MVPs over some guys who we clearly thought were better players. Just that particular special season, they earned the MVP honor. It's going to be interesting. I'll say this. The only thing I think would be egregious is if Jokic just runs away with it again. Because like last year, Shai was a second place. Like he was the runner-up. But you look at the voting breakdown, and he had no chance. I mean, he had zero chance. And if that ocean between those two in the vote category doesn't change, then it again just reaffirms to me it should just be renamed the Jokic Award, and that's just what it is. It's just Jokic every single year.
Well, one guy who could break that in the next few years, not Shai, is Victor Wembanyama, because he's going to put up gaudy numbers, and I think that to put up the same numbers as Jokic, you sort of have to be a point forward, point center. in terms of handling the ball all the time, rebounds, points, scoring. And I think the defensive metrics are going to favor Wembanyama. And, the MVP is narrative based in a lot of ways where people like to see a new face winning. I think that's a major part of why Jokic didn't three-peat a few years ago when Embiid got his one. So I think that there is some sort of I don't want to say voter remorse, but regrets in terms of Jokic not winning that one. So there was a little bit of boosting him up the last couple of years of just out of regret for that and feeling bad. But, Shai, it reminds me a lot of Tim Duncan, where he got his one. I think he only won one, but he almost does get punished, like you mentioned, for that sort of consistency where he doesn't have these outlier seasons, outlier games. He just sort of is straight as an arrow, super, super consistent. And consistency for a lot of these voters, where it is narrative based, isn't as interesting as the guy putting the team on his back every single night with these super, super big numbers late in games where they need him, compared to Shai, who's been just as, if not more dominant, because he doesn't even have to play in those fourth quarters.
Yeah, and that's where I think that the Thunder get put in a weird spot, because we know the Thunder's brand and what they want to do. They're not one of these teams that send out marketing materials to why you should vote for their guy. They want it to come organically. Shai's not a guy who's out there demanding the MVP or crying over not making an all-star team whenever he got snubbed that year or whatever. He's not out there doing that. It's a very business professional-like approach and letting it organically happen. But you see the shifting of the previous precedent and what you're saying of the narratives. And I think that this is his best shot to go get one. And he's a player that deserves an MVP. It'd be a crying shame if he never won one. This is his best chance to win one because of what you mentioned with Tim Duncan, where, okay, last year he had the narrative, he had the storyline, he had the fresh face, he had oh my gosh, the Thunder, the one seed. This year, the Thunder were called on to win the West and called on to be the best team in the West. And they've done that. However, they've done that through a storybook that no one's talking about. Whenever people are discounting the Thunder and saying, well, they're just doing what they were supposed to do. Sure, this is what they were supposed to do. They weren't supposed to do it without Chet Holmgren playing just 10 games. They weren't supposed to do it with two different stints where Hartenstein's out and they have no center. They were supposed to do it with this fully healthy roster. And the reason why they're still doing it despite this injury adversity is because of Shai. If Shai was not on this roster, thus being valuable, they would have sunk during this mess of injuries, because we've seen what it looks like when J-Dub's the number one option. That's no slight to J-Dub, but it's not the number one seed. It's not this, what this is. So for as good as his roster is, for as good as his coaches, for as good as his front office is, it still all comes down through Shai. And I think that this is the year where you've really got to be beating the drum and banging on the table for Shai to win the MVP honor for all of those different factors, because next year, guess what? He'll drop 30 points a game. The Thunder will be the one seed, and it'll be a story that is just tired already, even though you've bared none of the fruits from it if you're SGA in terms of the MVP award. So I find this MVP race incredibly interesting, even though it's only a two-person race at the All-Star break. I think that's whenever Tim Bontemps usually does his second straw poll. So that will be a huge indication of what to look for moving forward. But it's going to be cinema to see how you push through, because as much as I think that Shai should win it, I also can't discount Jokic. I think that Jokic is an incredible vote. So it's not like I can go through the list of guys who voted for Jokic and say, you made a mistake, because they really didn't. Jokic is way deserving of the MVP. It's just two titans battling it out at the top, and somebody has to come in second place. And I think that at the very end of the day, at the very least, it should be one of the closest votes and one of the closest finish in MVP history.
Yeah, the idea that anyone on either side is talking about the MVP, whether it be Shai or Jokic, and just acting like it's a for sure thing, I think is ridiculous and ignorant to say that, just if things keep pace the way that they are. I think it does favor Jokic in a way, because we're talking about their team needing more wins as they get through the season. We get into March where, the teams that are tanking really start to amp it up, and there are a lot more blowouts and things like that. So I think that could favor Jokic, but a lot of the MVP, when it is this close, at the end of the season, that's where a lot of things get measured up. And the one pushback I'll give on Shai next season winning MVP is there is a storyline of the Thunder going to the playoffs. This is all just knock on wood, hope this doesn't happen. They lose in the conference finals, lose in the finals in some dramatic fashion, and it's the Shai revenge tour. And he goes off and they go and just rip off another one and just is really just banging on the door. But I think it is tough. I hope that he doesn't get sort of put in the same box as guys like Dwayne Wade and Chris Paul, where they were top players in the league for a very, very long time. They just happened to go up against guys like LeBron and Kevin Durant and Steph Curry right smack dab in the middle of their prime and couldn't get through and just break through that glass ceiling. But Shai, regardless of what happened, is an MVP caliber player and very, very deserving. But at the end of the day, like you mentioned, it's going to be cinema. It's going to be really, really fun to watch these guys go back and forth.
Yeah, and I think that one of the areas where Shai should get the benefit is the Thunder, even though they're going to have the 1 seed locked up. I mean, barring a dramatic injury to Shai, they're not going to blow a 6.5 game lead from the All-Star break to the end of the year on the number 1 overall seed. They're just too talented. They're going to get wins. They play too many teams that don't want to win during that post All-Star break segment of the schedule. But the Thunder are also going to have to play out that stretch, because you're not going to get Chet Holmgren back until the end of February, March, whenever he comes back. You're not going to get him back until then, and you're going to have to play to get chemistry, to gel together, and thus, if those guys are playing, they're gonna win. They're that talented, to where if he pulls off a 60-win season with all that he's had to deal with, it's a really tough sell that's not the most valuable guy. Whenever we've seen the other side of that coin with this team, of like the one game that he missed, I mean, that offense, that team, that was not a 1 seed. It was certainly not a 60-win team. So I think that he should get something for that, even if they go wire to wire and be the number 1 overall seed and not really have a ton of outward-facing drama. But if you do your homework, which is what voters are supposed to do, if you do your homework and see how they got to those 60 wins, and it was not baked in from how good we thought they were going to be in the preseason. It was baked in through adversity and through overcoming all that kind of stuff, all thanks to Shai. Just like for the Nuggets, the reason why they're going to be a top 30 seed is not because of their roster, because Jokic carried them there. Whenever there were 2 different times in this season where we got really concerned about Denver and the possibility that they can even fight back to get home court, much less fight back to get a top 30 seed. I just cannot wait to see how the rest of the way goes. I think that having Jokic right now as the MVP is a respectable, honest answer. I think that SGA also is that way, and we'll see if it ever becomes clear who should win this MVP throughout the year. But coming up, let's talk this weird week. I mean, we usually preview like 6 games, 5 games. We only got 2 to preview. Let's talk about how the Thunder should do. We're back on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Hope you do. Subscribe to Locked On Thunder on every podcasting platform, including on YouTube. We have our 2nd edition of Locked On NBA Squads coming up, where we talked about contenders and frauds and sleepers in the Western Conference. You can go see what we said about each Western Conference team on that show. We're talking with Michael Martin at Michael on Sports on social media. Let's Talk Thunder on YouTube. And Michael, 3 games in 10 days, breakneck difference, whiplashing difference from what has been this season. They've already beaten Portland, which we didn't even talk about in the weekly recap because that game was so forgettable, and on during the biggest NFL games of the season up until the Super Bowl. Golden State at Golden State, and Sacramento in the Paycom Center to kick off what will be a 4-game homestand in February. Let's start with Golden State. Where do you fall on this Golden State game? Because the Warriors sit right now out of the play-in because they've fallen behind Sacramento. And these games are all of the utmost importance to the Warriors, but they're 4-6 in their last 10 games. The Thunder should beat Golden State and should get on that high side, but they also have a week where they can really go a long way in deciding the end of this Western Conference playoff picture.
Yeah, that's a win. I think, barring some outlier 3-point performance, not just from Steph, but Buddy Hield and a lot of other guys, I think that's the only way they could get them. But just, they have no one to guard Shai. They have no one to guard J-Dub. I think we saw right before Dub got hurt in that last one where they played the Warriors, just how out of control the Thunder were. And then Hartenstein's a big matchup problem for them because he's just way too big for Draymond Green, who he's been injured in and out. And then he's way too skilled for guys like Looney and whatever his name is. Sorry,
Davis.
Yeah, I was thinking of Tim Hardaway Jr. and the initials there. But yeah, he's too big for them, and then the rest of the roster has just been sort of rolling. I think we're seeing an uptick from guys like Isaiah Joe and Cason Wallace sort of progressing to the meanest shooters. So I think it's one of those where it's just like show up, play your game, don't mess around early, and this is a win for the Thunder.
Yeah, I think it's a win, and that's a good point about their meeting in Golden State Thanksgiving week. Man, J-Dub was that could have been James' best game of the season, the way it was trending, and then he got hurt, and that kind of zapped out that game for him. But what a performance in that game, and those matchups still apply. The point about the 3-point shooting is a good one, because recently you've seen a minor dip. I don't want to overblow it and act like it's been something horrendous, but it is some of the aspect of it's the dog days of the season. You're kind of peering over at that All-Star break, and you're trying to see you're trying to see how you can get there, and we're seeing other teams coast. I mean, the Cavs are 5-5 after their hot start in their last 10 games. Boston and the Knicks are 6-4 in their last 10 games after that start. They literally are coasting to the All-Star break. The Thunder have not done that. They've only lost 3 of their last 10. And when you look at this Thunder defense, for the whole season, they have a 103.9 defensive rating, and they've let up just 42.7 points in the paint, and they've let up just 35% shooting from 3. In those last 10 games, the Thunder have seen that 3-point mark go from 35 to 36.3. So it has seen an increase. It's not been something terrible, but it has been a little bit from not as crisp defensive rotations, especially on the perimeter, which comes with fatigue. The overall defensive rating has gone from 103.9 up to 108.2. And then the points in the paint has gone up by 3 points per game in the paint let up. There is some element of, if the Thunder are playing extreme drop coverage and not on their P's and Q's, we just saw Portland shoot 45% against them from 3. Golden State has the shooters to take advantage of that. But even so, I think that it looks similar to that Portland game. Portland was hot. They remained hot from 3. They had a 4-game winning streak coming in. But when push comes to shove, at the end of the game, the Thunder were able to pull out a 10-point win, just basically on the back of SGA, and the fact that nobody could stop him, and the fact that they were able to turn it back on to make sure they got the win. I think that they can do the same thing against Golden State. And then at home against Sacramento, this is going to be what I think will be the most fun game of the week, because you get the Sabonis, who's playing excellent basketball right now, against Hartenstein matchup. And I don't really know who will get the better end of this matchup, only because one team is playing extremely desperate and they're clicking, and the other team, they have some wiggle room.
Yeah, the Hartenstein Sabonis thing is going to be really, really interesting. I think that was like one of his first games back when he first returned initially this season, and it was really interesting to see those guys sort of just bang and match up together. Fox and Dort is a really interesting matchup too, because he's one of the faster guys, which Dort doesn't deal with as well as sort of the more physical guards like a Luka. DeMar DeRozan, I feel like they're just going to funnel a lot of shots to him, but this ultimately comes down to one of the things, like I mentioned with the Golden State, of who's guarding Shai. And I don't trust Keelan Ellis. I don't trust Malik Monk. I don't trust De'Aaron Fox. I don't trust DeMar DeRozan. Any of those guys. And the only real hope for the Kings, I guess, is getting Hartenstein into foul trouble early, off night from Shai, and then a lot of scoring from the perimeter from their various guys like Malik Monk, who can get on a heater in any single night.
That's all the games we have for this week. I'm going to go 2-0. I think that's what the Thunder will do. I think that they have to go 1-1. You can't lose both. If you lose one, you can explain it away as what we've already kind of given the cop-outs for throughout these previews. But you got to win at least one. I think that they just go ahead and win both, between the home court advantage and all those things you mentioned that the Thunder have a favor over the Sacramento Kings for. I'm going to go 2-0.
I'm going 2-0 too. I think that this team was sort of reeling in a little ways after that Mavs loss, but just having Hartenstein back in the lineup, I think, has rejuvenated them and given them a little bit of juice just to get into sort of the last push before the All-Star break.
And Michael, we'll be back to preview the rest of this week, but what do you have cooking up on Let's Talk Thunder on YouTube?
Recently, I just dropped a video about Cason Wallace being up next for the Thunder, about how good he's been in Season 2, some historical comps for him, some Caruso stuff that Mark talked about, Caruso talking about him, and just sort of the jump he's taken in Year 2. And then also this week, I'm going to do something about some potential Cam Johnson trades, which I think people could find interesting, with next Thursday being the deadline, I'm pretty sure.
Yep, the trade deadline is looming next Thursday. We'll have a pod before then discussing your Cam Johnson video and the trade deadline possibilities. So make sure you stay on the lookout for that. Subscribe to Locked On Thunder. Subscribe to Let's Talk Thunder. Turn on that bell icon so you don't miss the Cam Johnson video or any other video from either channel. And until next time, be good and be good to one